Just know that this is being recorded so that we can share this presentation with others who weren't able to be here. I'm also going to turn on the live transcript, which will give you a transcript at the bottom of your screen. It's not perfect, but we will be cleaning it up in order to close caption the recording. And if you don't like seeing the closed captions at the bottom of your screen right now during the presentation, you can look down at the bottom and click on the little caret next to live transcript and choose to hide the subtitles. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we will get going with our presentation today. All right. Again, welcome everyone to Neurodiversity 101, how to promote and foster a culture of inclusivity for neurodivergent individuals. This presentation is based on information found in research and our own lived experiences. Our mission at the Neurodiversity Coalition at Indiana University Bloomington is to promote and foster a culture of inclusivity for neurodivergent individuals on the university campus and within the greater community. And today we're going to go over key terms related to neurodiversity, understand neurodiverse identities and intersectionality, learn about etiquette and common pitfalls and appropriate terms, explore myths and facts about neurodiversity, and understand how to be an advocate and an ally. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alexus Lucas to get us started today.
Thank you, Cecilia. So you can go ahead and go on to the next slide. The first term I want to go over is what is neurodiversity? And neurodiversity is the fact that individual differences in brain functioning should be regarded as normal variations in the human population. So as such, that category includes everyone from neurodivergent to neurotypical. Next slide. So going a little deeper into that, neurodivergent means having a brain that functions in ways that diverge significantly from the dominant societal standards of normal. And the neurotypical is the opposite, meaning it falls within those dominant standards of normal. And then neurodiverse is kind of a broader term that refers to a group of people. So a group of people is neurodiverse if one or more members of the group differ in their neurocognitive functioning from other members of the group. Next slide. So this slide actually shows some conditions that are considered neurodiverse and some of the positive traits that come with them. So the conditions are dyscalculia, dyslexia, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, Tourette syndrome, acquired neurodiversity, mental health, autism spectrum condition, and dyspraxia. And it, just so you know, it is possible for individuals to be multiply divergent, meaning they have more than one of these conditions. Next slide. We also think that it's very important when you're talking about neurodiversity to also address intersectionality, because neurodiversity is universal. In order to really understand both, advocacy must include intersectional perspectives. Next slide. So intersectionality is a framework for understanding how the different forms of discrimination, say it's sexism or racism or classism, combine and impact individuals. Excuse me. So because neurodiversity is universal, it can affect people across different races, different gender identities, different sexualities, or different religions. And layers of discrimination can result in late diagnosis, misdiagnosis, or no diagnosis at all, which means that they have no support at all. And actually, some of the research shows that African-American and Latino students get diagnosed much later than students of other races. And as a result, they have less opportunity for resources. And next slide. So in order to make sure that we have social justice for all in this category, we have to include intersectional perspectives. because more visible sources of oppression can overshadow or exaggerate the neurodivergent nature of individuals. However, neurodivergence is inseparable from a person's identity and is just as much as race, gender, or anything else. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ben Foley.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Alexus, for that. My goal here is to now discuss the etiquette when people generally neurotypicals interact with a variety of different types of people who are neurodivergent. And so what I first want to start off with is an overview, what I think is a general guidelines for how to approach interacting with people who are neurodivergent. And a big key thing to consider is that the best practices when you're interacting with folks is that they differ dramatically in different settings, and when working with different people of different backgrounds, and that intersectionality idea again differs very dramatically. Everyone is also unique in the world, everyone, but especially people who are neurodivergent, they're very unique. And so no two people are the same and should be treated the same. Taking the time to get to know someone who is neurodivergent, they show their particular traits, their triggers, needs, accommodations, and how they expect to be treated. And so taking the time to get to know someone, again, a guideline is very, very crucial in this situation. Next slide. And so what I first want to go into is that because I personally have experience working with youth, working with kids, and I see a lot of situations where it can be difficult to interact with these types of neurodivergent youth, K through 12 specifically. So I think there's a lot of do's and don'ts that I want to go over, that it might not be applicable to college necessarily, but still very, very crucial to consider in general. Don't throw norms when you're working with kids out the window completely. You learn a lot of standard kind of guidelines, again, a lot of things, rules of thumb when teaching or working with youth, but don't throw those completely out, but just try to tailor them to individual experiences, individual kids, because each kid again is different, and so don't throw them out the window, but again, think about what you're saying or how you're acting, interacting with different kids in different places. Again, a very perhaps obvious but important thing to note: don't yell, don't even use a stern voice. I am very against all of that, even with behaviors that can be considered negative, because I think that there are alternatives to teaching lessons about behaviors and working out conflicts, etc. So, and that can intimidate folks with autism or anyone or neurodivergent, anyone. Not speaking too fast, formal, vague. We can think very literally on the spectrum or neurodivergent folks in general, and not expecting folks who are autistic or neurodivergent to behave the same, especially under pressure, and don't expect them to conform necessarily, because everyone's at different speeds in terms of their development. Next slide. Now, the more positive side, do check in frequently, ensuring that folks who are neurodivergent youth, their concerns are vocalized to adults, addressed with adults, and that student-teacher relationship is very strong. I think that's a big thing I always see, that it can be improved for anyone, is that can be a big thing. And, again, this is controversial, I acknowledge, but no matter how low your pay is or low your position is, take these interactions with neurodivergent or autistic youth seriously. These kids, they may require a lot of different ways that adults interact with them, but it's very important that they have the support they need in their environment, and the support for learning or interacting safely and securely. And then also, of course, as always, with anything, you can advocate for workplace training. Me, as someone who's worked with kids for over 3 years, I have never actually had any workplace training that was specifically for folks with autism, folks with Tourette's syndrome, folks with ADHD, PTSD, of course, any of those conditions. I've never had any training. So it's very important to advocate for that because a lot of other colleagues won't necessarily know how to do that or go about interacting with youth. So very important points to note. And again, not necessarily college related, but very important still. Next slide. And then again, another continued version of the do's. Reward positive behavior, don't necessarily call it out, because again, we want to, and as I'll explain in a future slide, is to be able, to make sure that when you're interacting with anyone who's neurodivergent, is to ensure that that they're treated again first as a human, and that they're not, isolated or singled out because of their condition or their personality. And then isolate from ambient noise. Again, we're very sensitive a lot of the time. Sensory sensitivity is a very big thing. And so isolating kids from that and providing alternative activities for them is a do for sure. Next slide. Oh, sorry, move on.
I'm having a little technical difficulty here. Not sure what's going on. So
take your time.
There you go.
Awesome, sweet, awesome. So I also now want to touch on neurotypical adults interacting with peers, adults who are neurodivergent. And this is possibly more apt for college, but with neurodivergent people who you want to be friends with or who you want to interact with in general, don't tailor your first interactions to the label of whatever their condition is or their diagnosis or their identity. You treat them as any ordinary person. And I think that's so important for people to consider, and that we're a work in progress on as a society. Even if they experience or exhibit outward sort of traits of neurodiversity. Being aware of any disclosure that they might tell you that they have a condition, a neurodivergent condition. Diagnosis is private though, so keep those conversations with your friend or your companion confidential, unless they generally as a general rule of thumb. And then be sensitive, just like I compare it to gender identity or sexual orientation. Disclosing that to the public or to anyone is a very tough topic. And so giving it time, give it time with folks who are neurodivergent, because they experience a lot of pressure a lot of the time. So next slide. And then I just want to touch on some other specific conditions. Tourette's syndrome, it can sometimes present itself more explicitly. So just if it feels apt, if you feel like you should ask for more info, just again give room. Make sure that you can accommodate them and make sure that they feel comfortable, the person. And OCD and anxiety, again, specifically with this, being able to provide the resources for them, the comfort, the assurance when they're anxious or when they're encountering OCD, it is very important to do that. So again, the key guidelines are taking time with it, giving it time, giving them resources and room, and being sensitive about it. So I think that is all for my part. I hope that was helpful, and I'm going to move it on to Nejla now. No, excuse me, I'm sorry, Cecilia Buckley. My bad, Miss Cecilia.
That's all right, Ben. Thank you so much. So I'm going to be talking about common pitfalls. And the way I'm going to frame that is through the describing to you the 3 waves of treatment of people with disabilities in the United States. And this framework I read about this framework from Michael Waymire. So the first wave is called the professional wave, and these dates are very general, so they're not hard and fast, but they're waves, they're trends. The professional wave was roughly mid-1800s through World War II. Then the parental wave, post-World War II through the 1980s, and then the self-advocacy wave, the 1980s through our current time. So the professional wave really embodies the medical model. And the medical model of disability sees the professional as the expert and the person with a disability as having the problem, seen as sick, pathological, a menace to society. The person with a disability needs to be fixed, cured, and managed. You know, and in this time that we're talking about, this time period in the 1800s through World War II and still today, but not at the levels, you know, in the past, fortunately, people with disabilities of all types, including people who have neurodivergent identities, were institutionalized in deplorable conditions, and they were forcibly sterilized in many cases because the person with a disability was seen as less than human, and people did not want to even acknowledge that they existed. They just wanted to hide them away and eradicate them. You can think about a person with a disability studied like a bug too. And I think that, you know, these things have gone on all over the world, and it's important, it's really important for us to recognize and admit that they happened in our own country. And still, you know, today, the medical model hasn't gone away just because we don't institutionalize people at the rate that we used to. It's still there. And so attitudes to avoid from the medical model, being patronizing or condescending or judgmental or superior, pompous, arrogant, contemptuous, looking down on a person with a disability that, you know, you don't understand, demeaning or humiliating. And again, this isn't to say that every doctor has this idea. It's just that this is the term for this type of idea that in the medical model, the person with the disability has a problem, and these are the attitudes that society in general has and people have when they embody that medical model. So what happened then in the history of our country is that parents started rebelling against professionals wanting to institutionalize their children. They wanted to, more and more parents started deciding to raise their children at home, and they wanted their children to be integrated into the community and into schools as much as possible. However, during this period of time, and I'm again speaking in generalities, speaking in trends, you know, for the most part, people with disabilities were made into eternal children. They were not allowed full rights. You know, they had more rights than living in an institution avails somebody, but they didn't have the full rights of living independent lives where they're able to make decisions for themselves. So attitudes to avoid from this type of mentality, and again, not every parent has this type of mentality, and you don't have to be a parent to have this type of attitude towards someone with a disability. Avoid seeing the person as a victim. Avoid seeing the person as a hero. If somebody with a disability has an accomplishment and you make such a big deal about it because they have a disability and you put them on a pedestal, that still separates them from the rest of the humanity. So avoid seeing the person as needing pity, avoid seeing the person as needing charity, avoid patronizing, doing things for the person, and not allowing for the natural growth of mistake making, and having low expectations for people with disabilities. And I think, you know, maybe even particularly for people with neurodivergent identities in a lot of ways, it keeps people from becoming as independent as possible. It keeps people from succeeding as much as they can in school and work and in their lives. So remember, not every parent has the quote unquote parental attitude. You don't have to be a parent to have this type of attitude. And so to counteract that, remember to ask for people's opinions and preferences, give them choices, and provide them with opportunities to do things independently. And in order to do that, you may need to slow down. You know, a lot of times people who haven't been given choice in their life, and then suddenly they are given choice, it takes time to figure out, even for somebody, even what they want for themselves, let alone to speak it out. So you may need to slow down and take some time. And also, you know, with a number of different neurodivergent conditions, cognitive processing can be slow. That's again a general statement that doesn't apply to everyone, Some people with neurodivergent identities have very fast processing cognitively, but you know, some may have a slower way of processing things. So the third wave is the self-advocacy wave, and that's where we find ourselves today, fortunately. You know, that's kind of embodies our organization, right? We're a Neurodiversity Coalition. The self-advocacy wave, during this time period, people with disabilities started speaking up for themselves. There was the disability rights movement happened, and self-advocacy groups were born. If you haven't seen the movie Crip Camp, I highly recommend that you watch that movie. It's free on YouTube. It's an awesome movie. We gave a showing of it last December, and it really chronicles from the inside out the history of the disability movement. And if you also are not familiar with the Capitol Crawl and the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is portrayed in the movie as well, you can also just Google that and look at the pictures and videos of people without the use of their legs crawling up the Capitol steps in Washington for their right to live and work and exist in the community, in a community that allowed them to do that, you know, through modifications, through accommodation. So the self-advocacy wave embodies the social model of disability. And in the social model of disability, the deficits lie within society, not with the person with a disability. So it's the opposite of the medical model, where in the medical model, the person with a disability has the problem and needs to change. And in the social model of disability, the person with a disability needs to be accommodated by society. Society needs to change. Society is not accommodating all the people who live within it. And again, we just want to live, learn, work, and play in our culture, just like everyone else. So I did want to just stop and say, I see that there's some things going on in chat. That's great. And I saw somebody had their hand raised. We are going to take questions at the end. So right now I'm going to pass the presentation on to Nejla, who's going to talk about our next section.
Thanks, Cecilia. Hi, everyone. I'm Nejla Routsong, and I am a co-founder of the Neurodiversity Coalition. And I'm going to tell you today how to advocate for neurodiversity justice. First of all, why would you advocate for neurodiversity justice? Truth, justice, dignity, all the best reasons. But what is social justice? Social justice means that we deserve to live in a society that treats us like equals and that values our skills and contributions, that validates our abilities and life experiences. That's what social justice means. It means living in a society that is made for our needs too. Now, who can be a neurodiversity justice advocate? A neurodiversity justice advocate is anyone who speaks or acts on our behalf to society, on behalf of neurodivergent people. Now, I really enjoyed reading Ibram X. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, when it came out a couple of years ago. And I have followed his approach to reforming systemic oppression and social injustice in preparing this presentation. And as Ibram Kendi says, that anyone can be an anti-racist and anyone can be a racist. And if that's the case, then anyone can be a neurodiversity justice advocate. We are all living in an ableist and neuronormative society, and it's up to each one of us to make the conscious decision to unlearn our ableist and neuronormative beliefs so that we can stop perpetuating them in society. Being born neurodivergent does not get you off the hook or earn you any automatic points for this. So each person, regardless of neurotype or ability, must personally earn the title of Neurodiversity Justice Advocate. Next slide. So let's see why this is such a serious topic. Neurodiversity injustice is a serious problem for our society. And neurodiversity justice advocacy is serious work for us at the coalition. My friend and fellow coalition member, Hunter Cullen, is a commercial and industrial fire alarm enthusiast. And as such, he is an experienced judge of telling the difference between a funny topic and a serious one, like an actual life or death emergency. So I asked Hunter to choose a fire alarm to represent the kind of serious kind of emergency action that needs to be taken for us to help neurodivergent people and save lives in our society. And Hunter chose this alarm here. Now let's see how neurodiversity injustice impacts all aspects of our society and why policy change is the only way we can achieve justice. Next slide. So what is the harm from ableism and neuronormative biases, from neurodiversity injustice? Well, the harm is unequal social outcomes. As they say in the 2020 Korean TV drama on Netflix, it's okay not to be okay. And as neurodivergent people in this society, we are not okay. These divergent outcomes are not okay to me or anyone else in our coalition. And personally, these kinds of outcomes are why I became a neurodiversity justice advocate. So let me be clear on this point. We are a highly politically, economically, socially, and legally marginalized group in society. We should not be blamed or punished for how our brains function, and we should not have to figure all this out on our own. Neurodivergent people deserve social recognition, respect, and equal rights in society. Next slide, please. So how to become a neurodiversity justice advocate? There are 3 steps. The reason that there are these 3 steps is because our end goal is social justice for all neurodivergent people, but our locus of control is within ourselves. Societies first create us as individuals, and then individuals turn around and we shape our societies as we interact with the world around us. In order for our personal growth to translate into social justice, we must go out into our communities and change the social institutions that are based on ableist beliefs. This is the only effective way to enact lasting change. The best way to enact greater policy change is to find proven solutions that have worked at a local level, and then you make that an industry-wide standard, a congressional or a national policy. In step 3, social justice, this is a transformative kind of change because it means that we can produce future generations of neurodivergent people who will not face the oppressions we have faced. And one day, we may even live in a society where we all can truly live and thrive. Next slide. Growing up in an ableist society means that we have been taught to disrespect our own value to society and underestimate our social worth, and to even question the validity of our own experiences. Now is the time to stop that. Empathy researchers have found that what many people call empathy is simply pretending that they can read other people's minds. But real empathy comes from taking the time to learn the facts and data about others who are different from us. When you don't take the time to do that, all you're really doing is projecting your own false beliefs, the ones that Cecilia outlined. You're projecting those onto those people. That's not real empathy. Remember, facts are what drive real empathy. Learn the facts about neurodiversity to start practicing true empathy based in objective reality and identifying positively with us as human beings, rather than projecting negatively onto us as beings with different neurotypes. You need to start respecting people of all abilities, paces, and neurotypes as valid and worthy of respect. That means you have to assume competence, skill, and good motives of all people, which is something I always told my students in my college classes that we should do throughout my class, is to assume competence, skill, and good motives, because then if you project anything, you're projecting positive traits onto people. And then finally, it's important to keep it intersectional, accessible, and collegial, whatever you're doing. And Alexus did a fine job of describing intersectional issues within neurodivergence. I would just add that if you believe in moral duty, then you may believe, as I do, that social justice movements have a moral duty to prioritize and protect the most marginalized groups within their communities. And if you want to do that, the only way that you can do it is by learning the facts about each one of those subsets and educating yourself on all these other types of oppression so that you can learn what their struggles are and relate to them and show solidarity. And the last point is similar. So keep it collegial. The word collegial, some people are surprised to learn, doesn't have anything to do with college. It's more about being friendly. And this is really what you need to focus on in your neurodiversity justice work. So yeah, when you're friends with someone, you take the time to learn about the motives and interests and struggles that they have. And that's how you can show political solidarity with them on those issues. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so what do addiction, Tourette's, Downs, ADHD, dementia, OCD, PTSD, depression, anxiety, eating disorders all have in common? We all share common policy interests. Neurodiversity gives us a policy voice in society. What is our common interest? We have all suffered harm under ableist and neuronormative bias in our society. See that picture of a human cell? That's the most relevant fact to remember about neurodivergent people. The reality is that we are human beings just like everyone else, and that's what gives us equal rights in society. Next slide. Okay, now we're going to talk about unlearning ableism, neurodiversity, mental illness, and disability. So these have to do with identity, right? Now we're talking about how you identify. Do you identify as maybe neurodiverse, but then you say, oh, but I'm not disabled. So I've actually, known people who tried to identify as just one of these categories and not the others. And I'm sure while that can be technically true at various times in your life, if you learn these, which are hyperlinked here, but if you learn these models of the social model of disability, like Cecilia discussed, the lifespan perspective of human development, which basically says that we're all going to be disabled at some point in our life, because everyone develops at different speeds, and that's valid and needs to be respected. So if you learn about these things, then you learn that we're all going to be all of these things at multiple points in our lifetimes. So we will all benefit from a more neurodiverse society, a society built for all of us. So why don't we design our society to reflect this instead of shaming and stigmatizing people who are neurodivergent? So I personally recommend that you get comfortable as a neurodiversity justice advocate, identifying with and as people who are disabled and mentally ill, and affirming the inherent worth in those labels. And so here on the slide, I've included 2 things to do, and then I've included 2 things to stop doing in order to better protect these specific communities. Okay. And I would add with number 3, we may think, oh, I would never use that kind of language about people, but you may be surprised if you look at, maybe some of the memes you share or some of the jokes you laugh at that your friends make. A lot of times, especially if it's about like an opposite political party or an opposing political party or like another team or something like that, people do say things that are surprisingly ableist and offensive. And if you want to be a neurodiversity justice advocate, you need to cut that out. especially for people you don't like. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, step 2. When it comes to justice and advocacy work, impact matters more than intention. That means after we learn these facts and we change our own mindset, we go back into society and we create permanent and lasting change. That's how, the only way to do that is by working diligently to remove the neuronormative bias from our social institutions. But this is difficult and risky work. Don't try it alone. Join clubs, social media groups, follow neurodivergent blogs, websites, and connect your ideas with other people's. Next slide. Remember that acceptance is a form of individual change, not a systemic one. It's great and wonderful to change an individual's beliefs about neurodiversity, but that's not the same thing as justice. Justice means changing social institutions in which we live to give us equal rights in society so that future generations may not suffer the harm that we have. In order to transform individual acceptance into social justice for everyone in our society, we must first transform our own beliefs from individualist ones into actionable systemic beliefs that can directly translate into the needed policy changes. And this is how we can replicate our impact hundreds or millions of times over what we would have by simply talking to people one at a time to try to change their minds, for example. And here are 2 examples of how you can transform individualist beliefs to systemic ones. Next slide. And step 3 is, of course, policy change. And I've included 3 different types of policy ideas here. So now you've conceived some working solutions within your community and you're ready to translate them into social policy. Here's some examples I've thought of to get you started. Now, to clarify, these ideas are my suggestions for making the greatest impact on leveling the playing field for future generations of neurodivergent people. None of these policy ideas represent official endorsements by the coalition or by Indiana University. Additionally, this is not intended as a comprehensive list of the only kinds of policies that can help the neurodivergent population. There are countless kinds of policies that can help us to have more equal life outcomes to neurotypicals in society. I hope this list can help you to create your own policies that are specifically catered for your organization and your community's needs. Next slide. So this area is education and employment policy ideas. And I mentioned housing programs there at the bottom. And of course, this is very important for neurodivergent people since so many neurodivergent people end up unhoused in society. And I wanted to add that in February, the City of Bloomington Sustainability Commission passed a Housing First resolution that I wrote and which cites neurodiversity and disability justice both as justifications for the resolution. So this is one example of taking your own personal growth and transforming that into real policy changes that help everyone in your society. Next slide. Okay, and then here's a few healthcare medical policy ideas. These are just a few of the ways that you can further engage your community and achieve justice in our larger society for neurodivergent people. But these are not the only ways. And the best part about social justice is that we all get to decide what it means, what neurodiversity means, and how our social institutions can be made to provide justice to all people. Next slide. In summary, this is not a drill. This is a real emergency. So I am going to sound the alarm for neurodiversity justice. Hunter Cullen, who I mentioned before, who helped me prepare this presentation, he chose this specific alarm tone that we're going to play to specifically awaken all neurodiversity justice advocates to action. So listen and enjoy feeling energized and awakened. It's 8 seconds long. If you are sensitive to high-pitched noises, I would recommend turning down your listening volume for the next 8 seconds. And we'll give you a couple seconds to do that before playing the tone.
All right, give me a few seconds here to find the play
Yeah, let's
button.
do it.
Hold on.
Oh, it was that little, yeah, you have to go to the left. Yeah, right there. Yeah, that's it. Now go out there and believe it, conceive it, and achieve it. Thanks for listening, and please check out the sources that were used to prepare this presentation, which are grouped by topic and hyperlinked in the citation section. Now I'm going to turn it to Brenna to talk about being an effective advocate in Bloomington.
Hello, my name is Brenna Henning and I'm part of the coalition. As people become more informed of neurodiversity culture and topics, more people are realizing that they may be neurodivergent themselves. And with this awareness of neurodiversity community, it is important that there's a safe environment for neurodivergent people within each other. But also it's important for there to be an inclusive environment in our own communities. And as we talk about how to make a more inclusive community at IU and in Bloomington, we need to ask this question: how to establish a culture for neurodiversity? Next slide, please. Okay. And one way to establish neurodiversity culture is providing access to accommodations that will provide opportunities. And one of the best places to establish this is in education. We all know is that it's important for all students to be able to access an education. And and I'm going to use a reference from Thomas Armstrong's book, Neurodiversity in the Classroom, where he talks about the positive niche construction. And in his book, he talks about the importance for educators to provide a space for neurodivergent students to have an education. The positive niche construction, it celebrates all students, and we want to make this very clear that no two students are alike, and sometimes in education there's always this seems to have a survival of the fittest mentality, and this idea is wanting to go away from that, from this horrible construction that society has made. So one way that we know for sure for neurodivergent students is to have the least constructive environment, which is better for everyone to thrive in the education environment. Next slide, please. And part of the positive niche construction, one of the ideas is identifying each student's strengths. We need to recognize what are students good at. Are they good at art? Are they good at math? Are they good at science? These are questions that educators should be asking to their students. And one toxic thing that an educator can do is limit a student's abilities, which will be harmful for them in the future and will create negative stereotypes. And also we need to establish in our educational systems is having positive role models that are neurodivergent themselves, like the two famous and awesome ladies on the screen, which are Greta Thunberg and Whoopi Goldberg. And these two amazing ladies have both have succeeded and broke barriers in our society. And it's important for everyone to see role models like that. And also, it's really important for there to be non-famous people in a neurodivergent student's life, like their educators, their coaches, their parents, their doctors, their peers. I can go on with this list. Next slide, please. And also, it's really important for a neurodivergent student is to have access to technologies and universal designs for learning, like having extended time on tests and assignments, for preferable seating, verbal tests, audiobooks, or modified books, reduced homework or classwork, or provide an aid or therapy. Next slide, please. Also, another thing that is addressed in the positive needs construction is strength-based learning strategies. We all know that not all students learn the same way. Some students may need audiobooks, or they may need videos in order to learn the material better instead of the old traditional just reading it straight out of the book. Also, another thing that would apply to accommodation is adding having braille books, or that would be good for students that are visionally impaired. Also, another thing is having access to human resources. And human resources is at IU, we have CAPS and disabilities, and also tutoring centers, and also having more extra time with educators. And normalizing human resources is something we need to do, because in supporting having a support system in our educational environments. Also, another thing is for educators to do is that is part of the positive niche construction is having positive career aspirations. Educators should encourage students to be able to find what careers work for them. And going back to the strength awareness, maybe finding what they are good at that they can apply in a work environment. And sometimes I think in work environments, neurodivergent people may feel like they can't pursue a job because they may be autistic, or they have ADHD or tourettes, and feel like that will be an automatic disqualifier for the job. And also, another thing we need to talk about is environmental modifications. The Individuals with Disability Education Improvement Act requires students to be able to work in a less restrictive environment, like I mentioned before, having reduced bright lighting, providing earplugs, or noise muffling headphones. These are all very important for neurodivergent people to strive in our education and also in our society. And these ideas from the positive niche construction can also be applied into the workforce. In the workplace, you can apply the environmental modifications, human resources, and assistant technologies, and strike-based working into a employer or an employee relationship. Also, a career counselor or a career coach, they can also apply this technique to help neurodivergent people find jobs, the use of positive career aspiration and strength awareness to help neurodivergent people find jobs that fit them and that is right for them. I would like to pass the slideshow back to Cecilia Buckley.
Thank you so much, Brenna, and all the panelists. So these slides are all of the resources that panelists have put together for you that you'll receive in a handout with these hyperlinks. We will open for questions in a moment. We do want to thank you for coming. And we'll also have our email information on that handout, so you can feel free to contact us if you think of questions that you don't want to ask, you don't remember today or you don't want to ask today, you can feel free to do that. So thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and we will take questions.